it's very hard to follow Mr. Howe, Mr. Lewis, and Mr. McCutcheon because I'm a nerd. So now it's time to hear from the nerd. You've heard from important people that are gregarious. Governor Perdue called me his pointy-headed, out-of-touch theoretician. So, what I want to talk to you about today, so I don't have the slides that I can do, is Milton Friedman turned 100 a couple of years ago, and I think there's been several important victories for freedom since his 100th birthday, but I want to talk about three. And I bet you everyone in this room has heard of two of them, but I bet you there's one you might not know about. But I still want to finish with, there's lots more to do. We could make this a more free society, and I'm going to talk about educational freedom. And I'm a professor at Kennesaw State University. I'm also a senior fellow at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, which I'll talk more about in a second. Milton Friedman was born in 1912, died in 2006. He's a man of the hour, and so let's give him a hand on his birthday. First big victory for freedom after Milton Friedman's 100th birthday was 3 months after his 100th birthday, was the 2012 Georgia Charter Schools Amendment. This allowed the state to approve charter schools directly. The state thought it had that power. It created the commission in 2008. The commission was declared 4-3 vote at the state Supreme Court unconstitutional, and so the amendment brought it back. Almost 59% of Georgians voted in favor of that amendment. I make a joke, and I'm not really kidding, about despite the biggest taxpayer-funded misinformation campaign in Georgia history, almost 59% of voters voted in favor of the Georgia Charter Schools Amendment. I wrote a paper recently with Georgia Public Policy fellow Frank Stevenson and a former colleague, Brooke Conaway, and we studied who voted yes on this amendment. And what we found is if your county had a 1 percentage point higher percent of the electorate that worked for the school system, the yes vote on the Charter School Amendment went down by almost 4 percentage points. So my colleague Brooke Conaway jokes, if you work for the public schools, you convinced yourself, your spouse, and 2 friends to vote no on the amendment. So when there's more public school employees, that tamped down the yes vote. Racial minorities were more likely to vote for the amendment than whites. Folks that lived in communities with lower performing traditional public schools were more likely to vote yes for the charter school amendment. So I think this tells you who supports charter schools. And you probably know all this is a sophisticated audience. I'm just citing this one study because I think it was the best one and the largest. It was a study by the Rand Corporation, and among other things, they found that the biggest benefits of charter schools for kids isn't on test scores. It's on getting kids to finish high school and getting kids not only to go to college, but to succeed in college. And I'm a college professor, I'm an educator. I think that's the goal isn't to get a slightly higher reading test score in 5th grade. The goal is to succeed in life. And succeeding in higher ed is in graduating high school, and succeeding in higher ed are a ticket to succeeding in life. Milton and Rose Friedman, what did they say about school choice? We can go to their legacy foundation at edchoice.org. I gave this lecture 2 or 3 years ago. I can't remember where it was. It might have been in Atlanta. And I pointed out that Milton and Rose Friedman, their legacy could have been lots of things. Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in Economics. Milton Friedman revolutionized the way we think about monetary policy, about fiscal policy. Right? He also was a big leader in the methodology of economics. Objectively, those are things he probably should be remembered for. But what legacy did he choose? The legacy he chose was school choice. Was educational freedom, was, as one of the speakers earlier said, parents, or as Andrew said, letting parents decide where their kids should go to school. So if you go to their Legacy Foundation website, edchoice.org, you'll see all these great quotes, and so you don't have to read the large volume of stuff he wrote. And here's one I just pulled. They said, our goal is to have a system in which every family in the U.S. will be able to choose for itself the school to which its children go. We are far from that ultimate result. If we had that, a system of free choice, we would also have a system of competition, innovation, which would change the character of education. If we had full school choice in this country, no one can say what it would look like. We don't know. because we've never tried it. I go to the next one. Next quote, and notice this quote, this first one is from 1998. So before anyone was talking about income inequality or the 1% and the 99%, this is what Milton Friedman said in 1998. Improved education is offering a hope of narrowing the gap between the less and the more skilled workers, of fending off the prior prospect of a society divided between the haves and the have-nots, of a class society in which an educated elite provide welfare for a permanent class of unemployables. Milton Friedman believed that education was the key to solving any issues of income inequality. And then in 1979, Milton and Rose wrote, parents generally have both greater interest in their children's schooling and more intimate knowledge of their capacities and needs than anyone else. I was at a conference a couple years ago, and there was an African-American gentleman, probably 70 years old, and he had this great riff. And he said, you know, several decades ago, there was rooms like this with people of power and privilege discussing whether African-Americans should have civil rights. But African-Americans weren't in the room. He said a few decades ago, there was people of power and privilege, men, sitting around the room saying women have the right to vote. Right? He goes, today, we have people of power and privilege sitting around deciding whether people should be able to choose which school is best for their child. Does that make any sense that you don't get to choose what school is best for your child? My children are very young, and I've discussed this with them, and they're like, you can't pick where you go to school? No. If you don't have money, whatever zip code you live in decides what school you get to go to. The rest you got to pay for free. Does that make any sense? Second big victory for freedom, since Milton Friedman turned 100, was the Georgia Tax Limitation Constitutional Amendment, which I call the Schaefer Amendment, named after Senate Majority Leader David Schaefer. Senator Schaefer from Gwinnett County, willed this to fruition. The AJC wrote a big story about, oh, this amendment's not going anywhere. A week later, it passed. This amendment caps the personal income tax in Georgia and the corporate income tax in Georgia at 6%, which is where it's been for that your corporate income tax will never be above 6%. Because to get a constitutional amendment, not only do you need 2/3 of the House and Senate to pass it, you need the voters to pass it at the ballot box. It barely passed in Georgia. In Georgia, you need 120 votes to pass the constitutional amendment in the House and 38 to pass in the Senate. It got exactly 38 votes in the Senate, and in the House, the Speaker usually doesn't vote on things, but he had to vote in this case, so Speaker Ralston cast a 120 vote to pass this amendment in dramatic fashion. Every county in Georgia voted in favor of this amendment, all 159 counties. And I just put up a chart. Almost 74% of Georgians voted in favor of capping the income tax at 6%, 26% opposed. And then I just pulled the results for Chatham County. It was almost 70-30 in Chatham County. So, Milton Friedman had strong views about balanced budget amendments. Georgia, like pretty much all states, has a balanced budget amendment. Milton Friedman was not in favor of balanced budget amendments by themselves. Right? He supported a balanced budget amendment along with a tax limitation amendment or a limitation on spending. And until we passed this last go-around 2014, Georgia only had a balanced budget amendment. Next slide, please. This was a quote he said in 1983. I've never supported an amendment directed solely at a balanced budget. I've written repeatedly that while I would prefer that the budget be balanced, I would rather have government spend $500 billion and run a deficit of $100 billion than have it spend $800 billion with a balanced budget. And this is the key line. It matters greatly how the budget is balanced, whether by cutting spending or by raising taxes. We've seen this if you read the New York Times with Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize-winning economist who writes on the editorial page. He predicted very loudly and proudly that Great Britain would go into a double-dip recession when they cut spending 3 or 4 years ago. They cut government spending, their economy took off. Right? It matters how fiscal policy is done. Milton Friedman taught us this decades ago. Sometimes we forgot. Third big victory for freedom happened just 2 months ago. This is the first time in U.S. history that we have largely passed a universal school choice program in Nevada. So on June 2nd, 2015, Governor Sandoval of Nevada signed a bill that gives education savings accounts, not to every single student, but to every single student who was enrolled in a public school in the previous year for at least 100 days. They're starting to write the regulations on this. If you are in a virtual charter school the previous year for 100 days, that counts as a public school. So for example, you could put your child in kindergarten in a virtual charter school for 100 days, and then you get an education savings account. Nevada is a very low spending state on public education, one of the very lowest in the country. However, when they did school funding reform, they had a lot of property tax money count as state money. So when they created their education savings accounts, they said, okay, we're going to put state money only into the education savings accounts, which includes income tax revenue, sales tax revenue, casino gambling revenue, and some of the property tax revenue. So the education savings accounts, they'll vary by school district depending on different things, but for students eligible for a free or reduced price lunch, which is about $45,000 for a family of 4, those students will get $5,700 on average in their education savings account. And again, there'll be slight variations. And for families that make above $45,000 for a family of 4, the average will be about $5,100. So this is for a private school choice program. This is actually a very generous program as these kind of things go. The next one. So how does this ESA work? First, let me give you some details. State Senator Scott Hammond was a public school teacher. Then he started a charter school. He's the CEO of a charter school in Nevada. He got himself elected to the legislature. The Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice has legislator training 2 or 3 times a year, and I speak at it twice every year. And they bring interested legislators from that region of the country to come. And we had it last summer, one in Utah, in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I gave one of my presentations that I give there, and Senator Hammond came up to me and was like asking me a million questions about the fiscal issues of school choice and what have you. And then I noticed he was doing that with lots of speakers. He had never heard of education savings accounts in his life. And then this was last summer. So then in January, he introduced a universal education savings account bill. And what his bill said was, okay, you can use your education savings account for private school tuition, for tutoring services outside of school, for special services outside of school if your student has an IEP, i.e. special needs. You can use it for textbook fees, dual enrollment fees if you're in high school and you have to pay for college while you're in high school, and if you're taking a standardized test for those fees. He also had in his bill, any money you didn't spend, you could save for college. That got taken out, that didn't pass. So all the money that passed can be spent on this. So he introduced his bill in January, and he's a senator, so it passed the Senate pretty easily. But the governor was holding it up in the House because his budget staff and the Department of Education budget staff were like, oh, this is going to bust the budget. This is going to hurt the state budget, this is going to hurt the local budget. So the Friedman Foundation, they called me on a Friday, and they said, we need you to evaluate this bill, the fiscal, and we need you to fly out to Nevada. And I said, okay, when? And they said, we need it yesterday. So I spent that Sunday after church writing up a fiscal analysis of Senate bill, whatever it was, and it was like a 6-page memo. And then on Tuesday, I was on the red eye flying to Nevada, and I met with a bunch of people, and I convinced them that this was not a budget buster. Right? It's simple math that your 3rd grade child can understand, right? I mean, but it's hard for budget staff to understand that. Because what they do, I'm not making this up. Let's say there's a bill that affects the Department of Human Resources. They'll call up the head of the Department of Human Resources and say, how does this affect you? Usually that's probably getting a fair answer. But what they do on school choice bills is they call the head of the School Superintendent Association or the head of the School Board Association. How does this affect you? Oh, this is going to kill our budget. It's going to kill the state budget, it's going to kill the local budget. Kids are going to go without food and we're all going to die. Right? But it's not complicated. But the bill did pass, and the governor signed it into law once he was satisfied that it wasn't going to cause a fiscal. Can you go to the next slide? There's only one regulation that I want to point out in the bill, and that is that if you get an ESA in Nevada, you must take a nationally normed reference test, like the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, the Stanford 10, whatever it's called now, the Cognitive Achievement Test, etc. I believe there's 6 of them. And then You take that test, you're in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 10th grade, whatever, and then the results are reported to the state, and then they aggregate the results for all the students getting ESAs, and so they're evaluating the program. They're not evaluating any individual school, because they don't want schools to teach to the test. 3 years after the program begins, the state will also report high school graduation rates for students who have ESAs. I forgot the next one. So those are all big victories for freedom in this country. 2 in Georgia: the Charter Schools Amendment, the Tax Limitation Amendment, and Universal School Choice in Nevada. But I think I want to point out 3 opportunities to expand educational freedom here in Georgia. We have a tax credit scholarship program that no one's heard of. Right? It's capped at $58 million. You can take, if you're a married couple, $2,500 of your state income tax liability, redirect it to a nonprofit. Instead of paying it to the state, you pay it to this nonprofit, and then they give scholarships for kids to go to private schools. We were walking to the restaurant last night, some guy said, what are you guys doing here? What are you talking about? And I mentioned that, and he goes, I've never heard of that. And I said, your kids in private school? He said, yeah. He goes, I'd like to get to that. I said, really? You can. But it's capped at only $58 million. This year it was gone on day 1. So it was gone on January 1st. All the money was gone by about 9:30 in the morning. Second one, there's a real opportunity to have education savings accounts in Georgia. There was a bill last year, and I think it has a real chance. And also, I think we need, I should have changed this. We don't just need more equitable funding, we need more equity for charter schools. And let me talk about all these now. Last year, I did a survey of 1,000 Georgia adults regarding their attitudes about the school choice. Now, Republicans get mad on these surveys, and they say, are you doing registered voters or likely voters? So if you do registered voters as opposed to likely voters, that skews left wing. I did adults, so that skews left wing even more. Right? I got a respected nonpartisan research firm to do it. I did this when I was a professor at Georgia College. Right? I forget the next one. So one question we asked, and sorry for the long question, is the state of Georgia allows individual taxpayers, married couples, and corporate taxpayers to redirect some of their state income tax payments to student scholarship organizations. These SSOs provide scholarships to public school students whose parents wish to enroll them in a private school. This program is called blah, blah, blah. Have you heard of this program? Almost 0 have heard of this program.
I've heard it.
Yeah, good for you. Second question. A tax credit scholarship system allows parents the option of sending their child to the school of their choice, whether that school is public or private, including both religious and non-religious schools. In general, do you favor or oppose a tax credit scholarship system? Do you strongly favor or strongly oppose? 70% of respondents said they strongly or somewhat favor tax credit scholarships, 24% opposed. Right? Then we asked them, do you agree or disagree with the following statements? Do you think tax credit scholarships should be available to all families regardless of income? Or do you think they should only be available to low-income families? 69.4% thought that these scholarships should be open to all. 28% strongly or somewhat. Can you go back 2 slides? Look at those numbers. You go back one more. Are about the same? Yeah. That one. It's the left one.
Oh, that one?
Yeah. One more. Oh, sorry. No, just go back. Yeah, sorry. Those numbers are about the same as 2 slides before. So what I found was, when I looked at the crosstabs, everyone who supported the program, except for like 2 people, they support the program, they think it should be open to all. Everyone opposed to the program thinks it should be means tested. And those who were unsure, about 2 to 1 thought it should be means tested. So people who support school choice, almost 100% of them, think it should be for everybody. People opposed want to limit it. Then we asked, the maximum 58 million donations to scholarship organizations was used up in the first 3 weeks of 2014. So in 2014 it was gone in 3 weeks. Would you support raising the max to 100 million? It's about 62% wanted to raise it to 100 million, 29%. An education savings account, often called an ESA, allows parents to take their child out of a public school and receive a payment into a government-authorized savings account with restricted but multiple uses. Parents can use these funds to pay for private school tuition, virtual exchange programs, private tutoring, or save for future college expenses. In general, do you favor or oppose this kind of savings account system? About 68% favor and 27% opposed. Georgians want this. The charter school amendment, I didn't poll it because we knew the answers to that one, right? When they were writing the ballot language for the charter school amendment, Andrew might have paid for this, but I saw the secret polling data, and the first way they wanted to ask the polling question on the ballot, 70% of Georgians supported the charter school amendment. Then the way that actually was on the ballot, 66% supported that language, and then it passed with about 59% after the misinformation campaign. Right? So we know what Georgians think about charter schools. They're all for it. They also seem to be all for these other programs. Kelly was the one who suggested I put this in here when I was showing him the data. I wouldn't have done that, so thank you. This is cross-test by your political affiliation. So you can look at Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. 67% of Democrats support the tax credit scholarship program, 27% opposed. Notice it's not much different between Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. So this support for school choice crosses party lines. We go to the next one. Support for universal access by party. Democrats are less likely to support universal access than Republicans and Independents, but notice by 2 to 1. By 2 to 1, Democrats support universal school choice. Support raising the donation cap to $1 million. Republicans are the least likely to support it. I mean, they almost supported 2 to 1, but I think because they thought it cost money. So when I gave this talk last year, I said to the Republican legislators, you need to educate your voters about you're pulling a kid out of a public school, so you're saving tax money on that side. But notice Democrats and Independents, by better than 2 to 1, support raising the cap. I also think we have an opportunity in Georgia for equity for charter schools. And a lot of you in this room know this better than me. Brick and mortar charter schools, not virtual charter schools, just regular old charter schools with a building, right? They get about 80% on average, and this varies by district, of the funding that goes to the traditional public school 2 blocks away. Right? That's a joke, right? I mean, that's ridiculous and shouldn't be. And by a couple word changes, we can fix that. Right? So I would hope that this new funding commission, the Governor Deal has his commission, would come out in favor of equal funding for charter schools. And I'll be honest, I've known charter school folks for 25 years. I think they'd be happy with close, right? Because they've been beat up so long, right? It's kind of a Stockholm syndrome, right? We'll just take close, right? Next thing is apples to apples accountability, right? There's a new study out about charter schools in Georgia, and they compare charter schools to the state average and to the district average. Not in all cases, but very often charter schools are located next to the very worst traditional public schools. Take a charter school, say in Southwest Atlanta. Southwest Atlanta has some of the very lowest achievement in these United States, in their traditional public schools. The charter school there seems to be doing better than that. Oh, but they're getting dinged because they're below the state average. Well, you know what? All those other choices of schools those kids have are well below the state average and probably below the average of Mexico, right? So why are we going to close a school that's a lot better than the schools nearby? And I'll tell you a heartfelt personal story. So when I was chair of the Charter Schools Commission, we were being sued. I was the 4th defendant on that case. I was innocent. They convicted me 4th defendant. There was 2 charter schools that had been approved by local school boards, had been open for 5 years, and then they had bad results and they were denied reapproval by the local school boards. So then they came to the state commission asking for another 5-year charter. Let me talk to you about one of them in Clayton County. I won't say their name, Lewis Academy. Lewis Academy was named after the husband-wife team that ran it. I think I might have a bad, but I think the wife was the principal, and the husband and the wife were on the board. Right? So they had governance issues. Right? They were shooting contract money to like the husband's company. Right? There was money missing. Their achievement data was bad. They had the erasures on the CRCTs. Right? So we voted 7-0 to close that school. Right? And I bet you every one of you is like, good job, man, you know, we think you're a moron, but hey, you did one thing right, you went to close that school. I got an email from every single parent, maybe not every single, but I think every single parent at that school, and it wasn't AstroTurf. These were heartfelt emails written by very uneducated parents in Clayton County, begging me not to vote to close their school. Because what they said is, guess where we're going to go now? Back to Clayton County Public Schools, which, for those of you not from Metro Atlanta, they were the first school district in the United States a few years ago to lose accreditation since 1969. They had had a series of scandals at the school board level going on there. So they were saying, our school at Lewis Academy is safe. Our kids are safe there. That should count for something. Who am I, who are we to tell those parents that that school is not good enough for your kid? Those parents actively made a choice. If those parents were lazy and did nothing, they would go to the school in their community that they're zoned for. But those parents actively said, you know what? This Lewis Academy is better. And you should have seen the emails. The parents were saying, we know this school stinks, but it's better than what we would have. Now, if I had changed my vote, the vote would have been 6-1. I wouldn't have given it to anyone. And at that time, the charter school movement was in a tenuous political place. The optics would have been terrible, right? But I still to this day, sometimes I'm up at night going, how many parents did I just screw? Right? It's ridiculous. So my views have changed from personal experience over the years about, the charter school movement is very good about saying, yes, you should close failing charter schools. And I believe that. But I think you need equity in how you think about accountability for charter schools. What are those parents' options? And is this the best option for those parents? If yes, keep it open. If no, close it. I don't think you should compare it to the state average. I also think we should look more at graduation and college, high school graduation and college success. There's some national clearinghouse database now. We can look at this at the state level at a very low cost, almost no cost. Some policy analyst in the Governor's Office of Student Achievement could do this in like half a day. Right? Let's look at charter schools where they do there, because that's what counts in life. No one remembers how you did on the ITBS when you were in 3rd grade today, right? But they know where you went to college and if you finished. Right? Last point I want to make about equity for charter schools is charter schools are held accountable twice, right? If no parents want to send their child there, they don't get any money. Traditional public schools, if people don't want to go there, still get local money and federal money, right? And state money is taken away like a year later. Charter schools, if one kid leaves a charter school, they lose full funding for that kid immediately, right? Second way they're held accountable is people like me can vote to close them down. Right? Traditional public schools don't get closed down for failure, almost never, almost zero, right? After decades. But I also think the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, they could survey charter school leaders, board members, things like that, and say, how was your experience with your authorizer? Right? How was the process? Were they helpful after you got approved? I think you would, in theory, you'd like to survey the people that were denied, but again, they have an axe to grind, so maybe they wouldn't get accurate things, even though they might be telling the truth. But I think you could survey charter school leaders who are approved anonymously and say, how was your authorizing experience? I remember when I was chair of the commission, I would ask different groups, how did we do? And they were like shocked that I wanted to know. I'm like, well, I want to hold the staff accountable. I can fire them tomorrow. The commission can fire them tomorrow. Right? I think we need some accountability on that end as well. I hear this over and over, right? And these are well-meaning good people. They're like, okay, Scafferty, your school choice sounds good, but in America things are pretty good. Why do we need a change? Right? Why don't we just fix the public schools? In one of the papers I wrote for the Friedman Foundation, I have this quote from left-wing social scientist named Christopher Jenks. Jenks was part of the Great Society. He was one of the architects. He worked for President Johnson and President Nixon. I believe he's still alive. He's about 95. He's one of the best social scientists of all time at Harvard. Christopher Jenks made a quote in 1966. 1966. Despite what you believe, I was not born in 1966. I was born after that. He said in 1966, it's time. He said, since World War II, we've been debating what to do about failing public schools. And boy, we've spent more than 20 years on this now. It's time, right? We put in more money, we put in more attention, more effort, we put in all this federal money, we put more money at the state level. We need to have a system of school choice. I, as a left-wing social scientist, agree with Milton Friedman in 1966. But we're still saying that, and I don't even know what year it is, I'm such a nerd. It's after 2000, I think, right? You know what year it is, probably, right? We're still saying that now. Why don't we just fix public schools? But my view on this is while student achievement's been stagnant, can we go to the next one? We've had this incredible staffing surge in public schools, right? And I wrote this for the Friedman Foundation a couple of years ago. From 1950 to 2009, which was the most recent data available when I wrote this study, the number of students in American public schools had about doubled. The number of school personnel increased at a rate 4 times greater. The number of teachers went up 2.5 times the increase in students, because we had a national policy of cutting class sizes. So class sizes went down. But the number of non-teachers, administrators, and other staff went up 7 times the increase in students. Amazing. This made national news, what have you. But now you can say, okay, we've had the Great Recession. So I'm writing a paper right now called Beyond the Staffing Surge. Okay? And there's been great cuts in public schools during the Great Recession. Where do you think they cut? Varies by state. Most states there and less on here. Some states even had cuts here, increases here. We go to the next one. You could argue legitimately in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. We needed more money in public education to educate disenfranchised students. Our public schools have historically disenfranchised lots of students based on race, based on special needs, based on living in low-income communities. But it's still happening, right? So this is 1992 to 2009. Same pattern. Right? This is still going on. Next slide. And actually, my data now goes through 2013, but now the staffing surge seems to be repeating itself. My view on fixing public schools is the same as my view on fixing the VA. Right? Our veterans who've sacrificed so much for my freedom and for yours, for my country and for yours, we should fix the VA. Morally, absolutely we should fix the VA. But while we're waiting to fix it, why don't we give them medical vouchers to let them get health care at regular old hospitals like where you and I get? Same thing with public schools. Morally, we should seek to fix the public schools because some kids will always go there. But while we're working on it, and we've been working on it since World War II, while we're working on it, why don't we give kids a way out to schools that their parents deem better while we're working on it? I think we can walk and chew them in this country. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.